Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Teddy Downey, executive editor here at the Capital Forum. Today, I'm very pleased to be joined by Austin Frerick, an expert on agricultural and antitrust policy and the author of Barron's Money, Power, and the Corruption of America's Food Industry. Austin, Austin's work focuses on market concentration across the food system and the implications for competition, policy, and economic outcomes. Austin, thanks so much for doing this today.
Yeah. Thanks again for having me on, Teddy.
Really quickly, if you have questions for us, I think there's the whole questions. I think there's a questions thing here. There is. I can't see it right now, but I will figure it out. But or you can use the chat. Um, I don't see the questions app, but anyway, we'll figure it. Oh, Q&A, Q&A. Okay, got it. So put it in the Q&A box, put it in the chat. We'll get to it later in the call. Um, I wanted to start with a couple of markets that I think we've been paying a lot of attention to, Austin, and
Hmm.
then get into meat in a second. But two of the markets that we've been looking at, fertilizer and seeds. And just wanted to get your sense of what are the problems in these markets? Obviously we have the Iran war sort of exacerbating the supply chain around fertilizer. What do you see going on in those markets? What are the antitrust problems? And do you see any interest at the state and federal level of sort of doing something about the problems in those markets?
Yeah, so let me start with the end first. I'm actually seeing a lot of chatter on the Hill right now about a possible structural separation bill on the seed industry. My dream here is like a Glass-Steagall type thing, because basically, to boil it down, is the seeds and chemicals are bundled, or I should say, like the pesticides, where the seeds are engineered to essentially resist the pesticides. And it's kind of like cable. Like cable used to be tied to your TV.
Yeah.
It's doing like a hard Glass-Steagall separation between the two. That is, you're seeing chatter on that kind of, it's kind of modeled after this meat bill that just dropped by Schumer's office last month. Here's the thing. We've known these markets, fertilizer and seeds. It's kind of like Groundhog's Day for the last, I would say, 10, 15 years of like every 2 or 3 years, they exploit some crisis to jack up the price. You see a lot of kicking and screaming, but these trends continue. It's just like this. And I think that overlay all this is the collapse of media in a lot of these communities in the middle of the country. So the extent of the crisis has been really underreported.
And what is the impact on, the citizenry in agricultural states when you have these monopolies? Because I know my instinct is to ask you about farmers,
Yeah.
but like who are the voters here, and why are they sensitive to these prices going up and these markets being monopolized?
I think so. I'm from Iowa, and a lot of people still think of Iowa as the field of dreams. That Iowa died in my lifetime. The family farm, especially in like meat and dairy production, essentially being gutted during neoliberalism. You've seen massive financialization of this space. Um, and so I think just you can't you got to overlap that thinking to all this. And so for that reason, I view most of these farming communities now as extraction colonies, where the land is producing the most it's ever produced, but none of that wealth is staying there. And so you're seeing the politics of anger really fill that void. I mean, so much of the political swing in the last 10, 20 years is rooted in this massive shift you've seen, especially in the industrial Midwest, in both the towns of 10,000 that got really screwed over by the offshoring manufacturing, but also the collapse of the family farm. And like one little example just to compare the two is compare rural Iowa to rural Wisconsin. The hog family farm died in the 90s. That's when Wall Street capital flooded that market, industrialized that, drove the family farm into bankruptcy. And then you compare it to dairy essentially died, I would say, in the last 10 years in Wisconsin. And rural, like you kind of see it like it takes about 20 years to kind of see it in the data because it takes like these assets are decaying. Small towns slowly die where no one's putting new capital into them. People are starting, what happens is usually the jobs dry up, they start driving longer for their jobs. And the housing market stagnate, that kind of dynamic. But I think that's something to really keep in mind here is the extent of extraction colony in rural America, but also the degree of Stockholm syndrome, where I was very critical of the Biden administration on meat. I don't think they did anything. I think it was mostly hot air. Um, Parties of both sides have talked a big game here, but the fact is, it's all gotten worse.
And so I guess it's hard, maybe a good starting point is like, what are the jobs that people care about? Obviously we'll get to meat in a second where people care about the price that they're paying for meat. But if you're not a farmer, what's the political sensitivity around a seed, the price, monopolization around seeds, monopolization around fertilizer and that type of thing, if you're not owning the land and monetizing it yourself?
So I'm gonna like dissect this. So
Yeah.
start with the premise. The Farm Bill actually makes food expensive because the Farm Bill is designed to overproduce a few things. So we subsidize corn, but we don't subsidize carrots. And so now this just happened a few years ago, where the largest use of corn now in America is ethanol. You're taking the best farmland in this country and you're wasting it in your car. You are subsidizing the crap out of ethanol. So you're increasing the cost of food because you're not growing food. On top of it, the growth of the corn belt, the growth of this ethanol boom is causing a cancer crisis in the Midwest. I mean, Iowa has second highest cancer rate in America. It's one of only two states growing. So you have that thing going on with the farm bill. Also keep in mind, it's pushing farmers to do this because if you grow carrots, you don't get anything, you're going to go broke. So it pushes you to grow corn. And I would also almost compare it to like almost like a retirement portfolio. You want to diversify your assets. So it used to be you grow your own grains, feed your own animals, kind of have this like different things going on in case one market cratered. What the system does now is it pushes people to do one or two things. You grow corn, you sell it to Cargill then sells it back to people as industrial animal feed, and then you sell it back to Cargill. So it makes you very incredibly dependent and fragile. I would compare it to like, remember a few years ago when that hurricane hit Puerto Rico and knocked out America's IV solution supply chain? It's very similar. And it makes it really expensive, by the way. I mean, these farm bills, we're paying a lot of money for food and we're getting low quality food. At the same time, too, New York Times reported a few months ago, farmers in the Delta are, they're plowing under rice. I mean, there's such a mismatch of the markets here. But you asked a question about jobs I really want to hone in on because keep in mind, part of the beauty of a family farm, it's kind of like a local restaurant. You don't do it to get rich, you do it because you love it. You have pride, you have dignity. You can have all these, think of Wisconsin, you had all these dairy family farms where, a family and 150 cows. What's now happened is, and used to be your own boss, is now you have these industrial operations where, in my book, My Dairy Baron, they're a part of 35,000 cows. They employed over 100 some people. And so they claim residency at the Ritz-Carlton in Puerto Rico. That's likely to evade capital income taxes. That's a different story. But now they're essentially capital asset managers. So it used to be family farmers in these rural communities, now are low-wage workers for these entities. And so it's like, and on top of it, if you ever drive a lot of these communities now, they're just sad, broken places. Like driving Iowa now is like driving the New Jersey Turnpike. It's industrial, it's dead. Next to most of these metal sheds where the animals live now, you just see dumpsters full of dead pigs. Like 10% of animals die inside these facilities. There's a cruelness. It's really, really hard to explain to like elite urban centers how sad these worlds have become. How like there's a justification to the anger people feel in this. And then on top of it, to all of Americans, especially me and dairy, this system makes bad tasting food. I always like to point out Kerrygold to people. People love Kerrygold butter. It's Irish butter. Number two butter now in America, likely to be number one soon. And the only difference between Irish butter and the butter American butter is the production model. Cows in Ireland are on grass. Most cows in America now, most butter is coming from Bakersfield, California, where there are these industrial farms on feedlots, and a lot of the cows are fed leftover byproduct from ethanol. So because of the fiber in the corn, that's why it's hard to spread because they're eating dead stuff. That's why it's white, not green. And so it's just like all these different things are like you're being gouged at the price. You're living in these destructive rural communities and it doesn't taste good. You know what I mean? Like, I actually think food is the best example of gentrification right now in America because of all this, how broken this is. And then, like, these stories just aren't popping through because of the collapse of media in rural America. Sorry, that's really dark.
No, 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 it's super helpful because what you're saying is the political opportunity is not really to fix something where you can just go back to the way it was before. Fundamentally, at some level, this is so broken that you need to this is why you're not talking about antitrust enforcement in an antitrust lawsuit on seeds or fertilizer, you're talking about meat, a structural reform legislatively at the federal level to restructure the market for meat, restructure the market uh, for these other inputs potentially.
Yes, I've been doing a lot of I'm working on my next book right now. I'm doing a lot of research into how we broke up meat a century ago. And a lot of it was President Wilson. It's very similar to this moment, actually. It was there was food inflation because of World War One. President Wilson, being a politician, was like, I got to do something about it. He asked the FTC to look into it. They looked into it. They confirm not only did they confirm everything, it was way worse than they thought. And like this little here's a little example is a lot of meat companies were buying like big city hotels just to force procurement of their meat. And so you have all these like we really because that's part of the problem here now is
So
we don't
that they were
really
buying the customer.
yes or an ownership stake into the customer.
Yeah, that sounds like honestly, it sounds like Nvidia to be honest, but keep going.
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, so that's because these companies are so big now and they're such black boxes, especially Cargill. Like Cargill is the largest private company in America that we know so little about. So they mapped out everything and they did a consent decree in response. Because basically there was a fear on the Hill of legislation. So they basically blackmailed them into a consent decree to put all these structural barriers. The problem with the consent decree, though, was it didn't apply to new entrants. So what happens where new market entrants came along, a few decades later, overtook them, yada yada yada. But I say all this because it was the breakup of meat is really kind of what ushered in that last big era of trust busting because meat, first of all, it's macho. It's very Ted Roosevelt. It's very every most Americans eat meat, and it's something like most what I've been told by grocery people. Most people pick your grocery store based on the quality of the meat and dairy case, especially older Americans who vote a lot. Really monitor these prices. I mean, even to show you how bad things are getting now is like I don't think most people know Walmart's making aggressive vertical plays right now into both beef and dairy because Walmart was basically to be blunt, sick of being fucked by these big meat, big dairy. So it wanted a cost insight. So that's why it's building out a massive um, beef operation in Wichita. Has like three dairy plants, to my knowledge, right now in America. But like that's where we
It's
are.
not necessarily to have their own supply, it's to be able to understand the cost structure so they can negotiate
Yes.
better in addition to having some of their own supply.
I think the most powerful person in the American food system is Walmart buyer. They're the closest thing this country has ever had to a Soviet Union Politburo. It's supply and command, and Walmart will always have the upper hand. And they felt like they didn't in that one area. So that's why they did that.
Fascinating, fascinating. And so tell us why you think, you've written a lot about this meat breakup bill. You mentioned Schumer introduced it. I was shocked by that personally. Uh, why do you think Schumer finally got interested in ag competition? Why meat, as a politically sensitive issue? Uh, and what have you been seeing in terms of feedback and response to the bill being introduced?
Yeah, I would just add on like I can honestly say that Schumer bill is the best meat legislation probably ever introduced in the US Congress. And it's not an Elizabeth Warren bill, it's a Chuck Schumer bill with like Dick Durbin co-signing. You know what I mean? Like you have, I think out the gate they had 16 senators sign on to it. Which is just incredible. Like it's
And can you walk through what's in the bill? You already mentioned a little bit, but walk us through some of the highlights first.
yeah, so they took one idea from Barron's of doing structural separations on the protein. So once you get over a certain size, if you butcher chickens, you can't do beef. Because that's the thing now is most of these meat companies are in essentially every line of protein. And so you're essentially you're doing that. It's forcing the divestiture of the American assets of JBS, which is like for the I don't know how they still are allowed to operate in America. They pled guilty to bribery to buy a bunch of American companies to become the largest meat packer the world's ever seen, and nothing's been done about them now. And the fact is, the Biden administration they got bigger under the Biden administration. Um, an undercurrent in my book too is I think people realize how much I don't like Tom Vilsack. I think the collapse of Democrats in rural America is really tied into him because he oversaw the death of the hog family farmer as governor of Iowa, and then the death of the dairy family farmer as Secretary of Agriculture under Obama and Biden. And then so it does that, and it tees up a divestiture of assets of Smithfield, of WH Group of Shanghai of Smithfield. And then it does a few other little things like certain market thresholds, but it's aggressive. It's a really good structural separation bill. I think what's driving this is a combination of a few things. Like classic example of just having good staff. There's a really good staffer on this. Trusting that Stafford to design, put together a good bill. I think his fear of AOC. I think that's like the most obvious reason here. And the third one is it's just grocery prices. I can't stress enough how much that matters. I mean, old people are the ones that vote. Of just like really leaning into this and like the meat, especially when there's like a gender dynamic in American politics right now. Meat is such a great way to outflank Republicans. Like it is what I spoke at a big cattle conference last summer in Deadwood, South Dakota, and I said it's embarrassing that a vegan senator from New Jersey is better on all these issues than all the senators of the Great Plains.
And I want to get to, well, let's say on pricing and other issues in this world, and then maybe we can get back to the political outlook in a little bit. There's this big merger, Sysco and Restaurant Depot. How do you see that affecting food markets, quality, price? Um, I obviously don't think there's any expectation there will be any federal enforcement of the antitrust laws for the next few years on a big merger, just given that you can just, hire Mike Davis or whatnot to get it through. But who are the big who might complain about this deal, and do you think the states might have a reason to look into it?
Oh man. I mean, let's be really blunt where we are. This deal could be stopped if US Foods hires or pays the right people. I mean, that's the state of our antitrust enforcement now. It's pay to play. I just go back to the Sprint T-Mobile merger where the same merger was proposed, didn't get approved, and then what they do it again is they just bought hotel rooms at Trump's hotel and got approved. I don't care what some economist says. We're in a pay to play era. To this merger, I mean, Cisco, I added on my paperback when it came out last year. I added a chapter on Cisco, and it was just because I've done a lot of speaking gigs and I've been in a lot of nursing homes and a lot of hospitals, and it's all the same food and it's all awful. And like my mom had a bakery, and I remember Cisco, and I was just curious about it, and it's one of those things where you type into Google Scholar Cisco, you're not going to get any literature, but it's something everyone knows. Like everyone's seen those trucks. So I wrote that, and part of that rollout is I gave that chapter to More Perfect Union to do a video on it. That video hit a nerve. Like it's the most viewed video More Perfect Union's ever had on TikTok, and it's like 5 million views on YouTube. And I think for that, it's for a lot of people. First of all, most people don't know what a middleman is. It's very rare in the food system that people know. But the fact that they know the middleman Cisco, like in the day, Cisco really is, it's just FedEx for foods. It doesn't really make anything. It just moves product. But I think for so many people, it captures gentrification of food. Like everyone's had that Cisco meal. So I go back to that wedding that served that very awful tasting, matte tasting food. And the thing with Cisco too to keep in mind is they don't, I can't tell this story in the chapter, they don't want to deal with local food. They want big boys like to run with big boys. They want one berry company to do all their warehouses. And Cisco is a creation. It was founded through mergers. It was founded by 9 mergers. Cisco doesn't compete, it acquires. I think I have the number in that chapter. It's over 240 some acquisitions it's made. Classic roll-up strategy where nothing got blocked because they were small ball. Only time they got stopped was a US food acquisition. For this purchase is what this matters for most people, this big merger right here is you have to assume at this point it's going to make your favorite restaurant or local food truck worse. I mean, what's been the saving grace for your favorite local place, especially food trucks, is they allow them to go to that restaurant depot because it's cheaper because they're able to have cheaper food options, big gallons of sour cream because they're not paying the delivery fee of a Cisco. And recently, Cisco's moved away from mom and pa. They rather do like they have a whole subdivision that does a lot of chain restaurants called Sigma. You can go there. It does like Olive Garden. It brags about all its corporate clients. But Cisco's kind of moved away. Now it's just buying business. Essentially, you want to get back into an area moved away from. But like one ray of hope where a lot of people feel like chains have gone downhill is your local restaurant. This really undermines them. It means a lower quality product and you're likely going to pay more. That's like what this means for most people.
So, and when you're thinking about it, obviously there's an affordability agenda at the state level. you know, do you think it's obvious enough that you have state AGs looking into this that like they're going to notice that food prices would go up and they would take action? I mean, you mentioned the path forward at the federal level is U.S. Foods. someone who doesn't like the deal just paying Mike Davis
Yep.
instead of Sysco paying Mike Davis.
That or my favorite little thing from the US Foods failed merger was the FTC conducted market shares for metropolitans between the pending merger. And I remember it was both Vegas and San Diego, I believe. And the documents in my footnotes would have over an 80% market share for they call it broadliners. That's what Sysco and US Foods are. And that's the thing that I love that example number one is e- when we talk about food, we can't use national figures. You know what I mean? You don't take a hog from Iowa and you don't butcher it down in Florida. Food's local. Like what matters in food distribution is what's the local market share for these companies. And like we just don't know. That'd be really curious is in these certain concentrated markets, how bad is it? And this, first of all, this isn't hard to do, this type of like market share analysis. But that's what a lot of AGs could do, is especially if you're in the California AG's office, look at the San Diego market, look at the Nevada market. Um, Generally speaking, from my experiences, the more those two are unique markets, usually rural areas are where Cisco tends to dominate more. That's kind of like the dark side of this moment is like you get some of the best food in New York, like in New York City, where you have the most competitive broadliner market, whereas like the communities that make the food are actually getting some of the worst food. But it'd be really interesting to carve it up. I just go back to remember that Stacy Mitchell report on Walmart's market share
Yeah.
when you actually start looking at metropolitans, where you look at like I think Wichita, Walmart had like a 60% market share. When you start carving up these things regionally, that's where you see really scary numbers.
And in terms of, they're not direct competitors, like you said. They're sort of, or how do you think about, you know, where Restaurant Depot is? Like you said, they're doing something similar, but they're in a place where they're moving away from it. Do they have any horizontal overlap or, in terms of, how do you think about,
I mean, that's
yeah,
the people call Restaurant Depot cash and carry, Cisco's broadliner. Um, I This is kind of a pet peeve of mine, and you see this in that chapter because I used to work at Treasury, is market definition needs to be moved away from economists, from like privately hired economists. I would love, so I come from the tax world where you have Treasury does tax revenue estimates, you have CBO do tax revenue estimates, and then Penn has its own independent. You want a bunch of nerds arguing over this stuff, so that way in case one gets captured, you still have two other numbers you can kind of that would refute that. I would love to see something like this. Like, there's no reason why. Like, for example, I could buy like every time you buy something at the grocery store, that data is sold. It's really easy. I've had that people have given me that market share grocery data from my Dairy Baron chapter. And especially if you know who does the store brand, you can quickly figure out these market shares. There's no reason why a state, federal government, or an academic institution can't be doing this market share numbers. Because like these are like what is something because like what Cisco will do is like especially in that failed US Foods merger, it's going to try to enlarge the market definition as much as possible. It's going to sit there and say Costco is its competitor, where like anyone that's owned a restaurant knows you don't get most of your stuff from Costco. You can only go to Costco when you're short on cups. You need to get one case real quick before your next truck comes. Like that is stupid. But you need to like but right now, I don't know. This is like too many people. These conversations are so walled off when like this should really be out in the open, and like we should be producing these numbers annually so we can essentially monitor markets. Like one little example in the agriculture space that's always gotten my attention is USDA publishes the average price of a gallon of milk for every major metropolitan in America for every month, and when you look at that data, you see Chicago and Kansas City they pay about a dollar more for a gallon of milk than any other metropolitan in America. And you just like know there's bad behavior going on there, especially Kansas City, because Kansas City is home to Dairy Farmers of America, which is like the largest mark co-op in America. And so it's just, but we don't have a lot of good data here. I can't say this enough.
in terms of, just a common sense way to think about the market definition, like what's to your mind a more common sense way to think about the competitive interaction between a Restaurant Depot and a Cisco?
I would say they're in the same market, especially for the local restaurant.
Yeah, it's like you can either have it delivered or you can pay less and go pick it up.
Yeah, or like especially like a lot of it's storage too. Like if you run a food truck, you don't have the space to have two massive things of cups. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You're very much like, and if that's who, especially like the most people on the edge who you should care about most, in my personal opinion, this really does impact them. And also like what a fascinating concept of instead of doing like pseudoscience in Excel, let's just go ask people that work in this space what they think is the market.
I mean, that's historically what they're supposed to do. But maybe
No,
gotten away
but
from that over the years. Yeah.
I think my hot take of this era is it's just got this whole neoliberal antitrusting is just lazy. It's
Yeah.
really easy to look at Excel all day and think you can understand these markets because but a lot in the day a lot of this is just moral questions that democracy has to wrestle with. How many hogs a person should own is not an answer Excel can answer for you.
Right, right, right. And you're going to get a different definition if you pay an economist than if you go ask the food truck owner.
And I would just add on is like you cannot underestimate how the corporate capture of the land grants in this country. Like go back to the fact that Iowa had second highest cancer rate in America. Iowa State is one of the flagship agriculture universities of the world, and you are not seeing any conversation of their academics on this subject. The only scholarship you see is how to put ethanol in the airplanes and how to put more pigs into a metal shed, because that's how you get tenure. And also, if you start going against corporate interest, you get chased out. So the academics, your power at these schools now are based on how much money you bring in. So, and also this is incredibly lucrative. Like that cannot be understated enough for these people. And these people, a lot of them dominate academic journals. My favorite, I go back to another Iowan, Kate Conlow wrote a paper in the Arizona State Law Journal a few years ago where after the Great Recession, we implemented disclosure policies for a lot of economic journals, and she highlights like ag econ, I think is the most corrupt academic discipline in America. A lot of the academics brag on their website how much corporate money they take. They then are editors of journals and they don't enforce their own disclosure policies. And then they're the ones that go on the NPR and saying you're not being gouged at the store. It's
Yeah.
rampant. It's rampant. And that's something I realized writing Barron's is every commodity had their go-to hack academic. Like the big hog academic at Iowa State literally does business transactions with my hog barons.
That seems suboptimal.
Yeah,
If
you
you
know,
want
it's not ideal. But then it's hard.
independent, yeah.
It's hard, but imagine the average in the court of public opinion, it's really hard to go up against a tenure hog chair at Iowa State.
I Yeah, it seems like it wouldn't be shouldn't be too hard, but if there's no one else doing any learning on this, that's what makes it hard, right? Like there's no independent media, there's no independent venues for dialogue and discussion, and so you end up having the captured interest and the money being able to push out their ideas more.
Yep, but that's why I go to the flip side. That's why I think this space is so ripe for reform. Someone's going to tap into the Teddy Roosevelt-ness of the meat. It's just like you have most meat companies now are foreign owned, they're state backed, and they're not even foreign owned, they're state backed monopolies. And so, like, at some point, someone who wants to be president will realize this is a winning issue. Like, I'm I'm convinced in my bones. And the other thing too, for the longest time, industry justified this destruction because it made cheap food, and that is not factually true anymore. Per person in America, we spend more money on food than most of our Western democratic peers. They're about dollar for dollar with Italy. Anyone that's been to Italy knows what a dollar gets you there is very different than a dollar here. I think that's how you put together this weird coalition of it's like a cliche for yuppies to say I went to Europe, it was cheaper and I lost weight. You tap into the rural wage, you tap into these different segments, especially Maha. Like Maha is a lot. I think people are now starting to grasp how big it is. I think that Maha is like Dallas Housewives mixed with Joe Rogan Bros. And it's like especially like Joe Rogan has really changed the diets of young men in ways I don't think people appreciate it, like the obsession with protein and like they don't feel like society provides anymore, so they have to get jacked in order to provide and survive.
Yeah. Well, we could spend a lot of time on
Yeah.
Maha, but I want to move on to a couple other things first. Uh, we have a question here. What would be some key aspects of your ideal farm bill? Just thinking about the farm bill, thinking about reform, thinking about Congress potentially changing hands. Do you see what do you think you should have in a farm bill? And do you see any chance that there could be changes if there's change in control in Congress, or is it, sort of too captured?
I don't think people realize the farm bill is dying right in front of us. I mean, the Republicans control everything, and they cannot pass a status quo farm bill. We're living under the 2018 farm bill. I think a lot of that's because the Maha or Joe Rogan thing. It's been underappreciated why they can't ram through this bill. But for me, so my next book is intellectually going to be what is a post neoliberal food system? Because like Barron's is basically the barons are narrative device to tell structural stories of how neoliberalism broke everything in the food system. I kind of think of it as like, when you give like a dog a pill or medicine, you put it in cheese. That's what barons is. Um, and it's something like I learned from like Barry Lynn. I used to work for him of just like you got to have a good punchy narrative. Um, but this next book is a solutions book because I also realized everyone kind of knows it's broken, but no one knows what to do, especially in food. And for the farm bill, I realized is like take crop insurance. These systems are too broken now. Like what people think it's not insurance what people think it is. It's not for like a thunderstorm. It's literally low weight, low price insurance where like 60 to 70% of the premium is paid for by taxpayers, but it only applies to certain crops and not others. And there's also no cap to it. So fun fact, Bill Gates owns some of the most farmland in America. He can get as much low wage price insurance to grow corn as he wants. So that's why you're getting things like ethanol. Ethanol is like an artificial demand to soak up surplus. What I want to move to is I just call it the stewardship payment. Combine the three parts of the farm bill, commodity, conservation, crop insurance, call it stewardship payments, and just instead of subsidizing certain crops, let's subsidize farm practices. Hey, if you grow cover crops, you get this, you get some money. If you do pasture agriculture, you get some money. You do buffer strips, whatever. Think of it as a toolkit. Let farmers decide what's best for their land. But I do not like the system of picking favorites, and I don't like supply management that a lot of people in my world want to go back to. Supply management is rooted in like the government picking optimal production outputs, and then basically anything over that they either destroy or dump in developing countries. I just think that's stupid. You just wreck other countries, and also you get things like cheese caves. I'd rather just like let farmers decide what's best for their land. But like that's where I want to move to for the farm bill. And like that's what excites me here is like there's just not a lot of vision here. Everyone's still trying to like make a broken thing work. Like even like the best example here to me is the dairy system. Our dairy program is rooted in 1920s America. That's before we had refrigeration. We don't need a program. Why are we trying to make a program pre-refrigeration work in dairy? That's not, you know what I mean? Like, let's just like, at some point you have to realize like these markets change. We need to rethink this stuff.
Yeah, and also as they get concentrated, more and more concentrated, all the incentives that you've had get perverse and
Yep.
manipulated. And so you sort of have to look at what you have now and restructure it, distribute power and things like that.
I view that as cyclical though. Like, I just think laissez-faire eras naturally happen. Like, it's such a simple thing. The goal of any corporate executive is monopoly. You don't want competitive markets. You want to essentially gauge in political capture so you can reinforce your economic bottom line. These things got out of whack. They go too far. They break, and they usher in a reform era. Anyone you look at, I mean, the food markets in America are so broken. Like it's the soybean markets are not coming back. China industrialized soy in South America because they need soy for their pork production. Ethanol, like cars are moving to batteries and hybrids. Like that's just a fact of life. But it's like watching Wile E. Coyote run off a cliff. That's why they're trying to put ethanol in airplanes. But all this is just breaking down. But like no one has a plan here. And it keeps getting more expensive because we just keep throwing more money at it.
Got a couple other questions here. Let's get to these questions from the audience. We've got a question. I've been learning about the current push to deregulate line speeds at poultry and pork processing plants. Limits on line speeds have been persistently relaxed over years, raising a lot of concerns over worker safety and welfare. Do you have any insight on the bigger picture? What meat packers are pushing for at this moment with this change and how it's likely to play out?
The best example is the largest donor to Trump's inauguration was JBS, the slaughtering baron in my book. After that donation, a few weeks later, they sped up the kill lines. The faster you kill animals, the more profitable those kill lines are. And you're also making one of the most dangerous jobs in America more dangerous. I told Schumer's team if the tweaks I would make to their meat legislation was add in something about reducing the kill line speeds, and then also cattle farmers, air tags, those little Apple things. They want to mandate that for cattle, and like cattle ranchers hate that stuff. Just ban that. You know what I mean? At some point, like you have to put together a unique coalition here to get something done. And by having a little something for workers, a little something for ranchers, something for all Americans at grocery shop, I think that's how you kind of do this stuff. I mean, that's why, like even like this, the ideas of doing structural separations in the seed industry, to me, that's a really good way to go after the Maha people. Is like put a Roundup ban in that legislation. Is like really force that awkwardness.
Yeah, let's talk about Maha. We've got a question here on Maha. You mentioned coalitions, unusual coalitions like with Maha. Are you seeing growing coalitions across racial lines? There's clearly a collapse in grocery stores and communities of color, shrinking Black growers, farmers, ICE antagonism toward migrant workers. You see folks building those coalitions and speaking across communities.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the biggest obstacle here is actually those coalitions are forming. The biggest obstacle to reform are suburbanites, upper class suburbanites, because like America works for them. They go to Costco, their kids go to the flagship university. They kind of like a Mayor Pete type because they don't really want any structural change, not understanding why we are at this moment because there has been structural change. Um, that's been like a big goal of mine is to show them is like the system we have now is actually incredibly radical. What we're talking about, these coalitions are actually very traditional. Like it's part of my next book is I'm using like so much of the New Deal actually came from like Wisconsin. Like this stuff always starts locally. DC's the last to know. So part of my next book is looking at what's good regulatory systems in other countries or what are good programs at the state and local level that we can then scale. And so like part of the reason why I'm telling everyone the Kerrygold thing is everyone kind of loves Kerrygold. They know it. It's like a good sales pitch, but also it's essentially a way to put animals back on the land. Like it is radical that we took most animals off the land in this country and shoved them in the metal sheds. But I just like really want to flip that rhetoric because especially in the Democrat side, you're seeing this like Matt Iglesias versus like whatever. You know what I mean? Like there's like this status quo versus reform battle going on. And I really don't, I think that especially at this moment is like I really want to avoid that.
Well, I want to say this for 1 second. You mentioned it's like so your suburban voter who is just not aware of what's going on in the agriculture community and
Yeah.
the sort of oppression that's going on for workers and things like that. But their food costs are going up. They're well aware of that.
And that's why I think this is plum for the picking is finally they're now being gouged. I mean, that is, but you have to lean into it because I think it took I mean, I presented this book in the Minnesota House Agriculture Committee earlier this year, and like Democrats are afraid of their own shadow here. I mean, dear God, all they can talk about is ethanol or year-round ethanol, ethanol in airplanes. Like, you have to, because you're going up against an ecosystem. You know what I mean? Like, they're going to attack you. They're going to like, industry will say they're feeding the world, oh, this is cheap food. And you have to be like, no, the data says otherwise. Like, people in their gut, they feel like they're being screwed, and they are right. And you have to like lead with examples. But you're unleashing a lot of dark money. I mean, these states are really captured at this point.
What states are doing something interesting? Obviously you have the Mamdani grocery store stuff. But really at the state level, where are you seeing some interesting trends and that could have broader implications?
I would say procurement. It's you as we phase out this old system, you have to stabilize prices. And to me, using institutional procurers, they just buy a lot. Um, like I'm having really interesting conversations with Texas Republicans of all people of for the longest time, a lot of people trying to change this stuff kept like using a carrot approach. Like, here's some money, buy local food. I like to joke I'm in my stick era now. And what they're thinking is just mandating that, all Texas universities, you have to buy essentially a certain percent local. Is essentially, first of all, those universities, they have large kitchens. It's good politics because that way the legislator's not paying for it. It's a good way to kind of, beat up on UT Austin. But you can change it. You can essentially say, year three, you have to do this, year five, you have to do that. But you just think of the optics of all beef, all cattle served in Texas should come from Texas cattle ranchers. Why are you serving rainforest beef? That's a really good way to get some Joe Rogan people. That's the Dallas Housewives. You know what I mean? Like it's good optics. It's that's what's giving me a lot of hope is the fact that like Republicans in Texas are really interested in that because Texas also has a really big Maha. That's probably where I see Maha the strongest is down there. But it's I think this whole Michael Pollan era just needs to end. Like you don't change systems with your fork. This is
Yeah.
about power, who's at the table, attacking structures, and like especially like these are companies like never forget meat companies where they're willing to employ children. They're willing to bribe politics. Like this is like power politics. Like don't bring a machete to machine gun fight.
Few more questions here. Have you seen any change of behavior by the Barons post Snyder v. United States?
Which Snyder v. United States?
I don't know. Can maybe this questioner can fill us in on what's not on Snyder v. United States. I wish I knew. Let's come back to that. Maybe they'll type in some more information.
Well,
Another,
Cargill, I
yeah.
would say real quick, Cargill, after that chapter came out, because I went on Odd Lots to talk about it, and also that video, they do the same thing Walmart does. You know, when Walmart gets attacked for made in China, they do like made in USA campaign. Sysco did the same thing. They rolled out a big campaign recently of like, look, our local food. That's what these companies do.
Yeah, I actually was thinking if you have a bunch of procurement at the at universities and they're like, we buy local, I wonder actually how much that affects, Cisco, because like, ostensibly they would be you would be getting it from someone other than them. They're usually the big player at these schools and things like that,
It, it,
universities.
that's like the big black box too here is like I referenced this in my chapter where like the University of Iowa, some journalists try to get the Cisco contract public records. It went all the way up to the state Supreme Court and it was ruled trade secrets of like what the
Yeah,
public
no,
university is paying for tomatoes.
we've tried to get into procurement time and time again, and everything is a trade secret. We tried to do that with the Postal Service. I mean, it's just like, how is this a trade secret? It's a public good, but
So they do little things too. Like what I hear is they'll design your menu for free because that way it kind of locks you into their, especially when you're starting a restaurant, it saves you money, but it screws you long term. Or like what I've seen too is they'll design kitchens to essentially be frozen food. That way it really stops. Like it's hard to do scratch cooking then once they're basically only designed to thaw and cook food. And it's also I go back to I was really mad. Part of what shaped me here is I went to a little school in Iowa for college that Warren Buffett was a trustee, so I had a big endowment. And the largest organic produce farm in Iowa was across the street. And went broke a few years ago, and that really shook a lot of people in this space. And like if this college with this large endowment can't buy local food across the street, and it was instead buy a bunch of tasteless food from Baja California picked by children, you know what I mean? Like that's but the problem is these cafeterias, a lot of them were like they were designed, I call it like remember that George Bush era of higher ed where everyone's chasing the rich kids, so they build all those amenities.
yeah.
Why are you having a buffet? Like buffets died in America. Why are colleges still offering a buffet of crappy food? Even when you go into these cafeterias, the first thing you tend to see is the fried food because that's the cheap food. And so you're having like a mental health crisis among kids in college, but you're feeding them the food that only makes it worse. Like all of this stuff is like that's what really shaped my knowledge, my view on institutional procurement. And it's such a good vehicle because in the day too, these colleges want the rich kid. And if you kind of tell them, hey, it's a good way to attract the rich kid, I don't know.
I
At some
I
point,
remember when public schools were flirting with having McDonald's and Burger King for lunch. So, I mean, this has been a messed up uh uh system for a while. We got some more questions here. If you have questions, again, you can put them in the chat. This has been great. We've gotten so much community interaction here. What changes, if any, do you think we should see to check off programs, Austin?
I was determined to write about checkoffs in my book. My whole dairy chapter is built around checkoffs because I think checkoffs control the conversation over America's food.
And explain to
Yeah.
people what the checkoff program is because it's pretty astonishing.
It's kind of, I mean, that's just, it's a good example of this moment of things with good intentions that went off the rails. It comes out of the Great Depression. Farmers literally checked a box. Florida juice farmers, they checked a box. It paid into a little, it's basically a tax on their production, paid into a pot of money to advertise their good. Drink more Florida orange juice. There's like 20 or 30 of these around America. Most of them are small and most of them don't matter. They're the things at the fair that hand you a free egg. The problem really started in the 80s, where as this farm bill changes to overproduction, how, the goal of checkoffs became how do we get you to consume additional production, soak up this surplus? And a few just went off the rails. Dairy is the biggest one. The Dairy Now checkoff has about a 600 to $800 million pot of money a year. There's no oversight, by the way. And like that to me is what's financing the revolving door at USDA is a lot. You go work at USDA, you go work at a checkoff, and then you go work at USDA again. That's the story of Tom Vilsack. It's very lucrative. What a lot of these checkoffs did was they ran those advertising campaigns, drink more milk, whatever. They realized that didn't really work. Milk consumption so went down. What they do now instead is they essentially finance a lot of the junk science because they realize it's manipulating this literature. It's but like a lot of these manure digesters you hear about in agriculture, that's all bullshit, BS, financed by checkoff literature, or like a lot of the corn on airplanes, it's checkoff literature. It's like the easiest way to get tenure now at a university is to potentially do the bidding of checkoffs. And the scary thing with checkoffs to me, and especially the pork one is the most concerning, is the vertical integration of this space. Like the largest owner of hogs down in America is the WH Group of China. They own like 1 in 4, 1 in 5 hogs. They also are the largest butcher of hogs in America. They own Smithfield. So the largest pair into the pork checkoff is a Chinese multinational. So when you see the American Pork Foundation, whatever, that's really the voice of a Chinese multinational. It's just incredibly, and it's also like part of, as news hollowed out, checkoff basically pays for a lot of news in agriculture now. And so that's why it's like company press at this point. And it's like, that's why it's like it took me a while to be in this space and just realize how delusional this whole thing is. Like it's like imagine if you lived in West Virginia. I really compare like Iowa now to like West Virginia in the 19th century and all the news is coming from the coal industry. Like that's where things are.
Yeah, I mean, you can see how people get in these conspiracy theories when, you know, yeah, the information about your food is produced by the food companies, and it's hard to find the truth, and you're skeptical of the food pyramid and government data because yeah, you've got revolving door, you've got checkoff, you've got all this, almost like government institutionalized lying.
Yes, I would say Maha is the result of Democrats' failure. A lot of Maha is two truths and a lie. And it's just like there's so much junk and so much manipulation. And like on top of it, even like the last three Democrat presidents, two of them were tied into the chicken industry. Tyson's made Bill Clinton, and Joe Biden comes out of a Delaware's full of chicken confinements. These things are really powerful. Like you even saw what got me was the New York Times did a episode, The Daily, a few months ago this winter about some soybean farmer in Iowa, and she was a checkoff person. She was part of the Iowa Farm Bureau and like part of the soybean checkoff thing. You're like, here's the thing: they play into the ignorance and naiveness of people on the coast. You know what I mean? Like they groom certain farmers that know the sound bites. That you know what I mean? Like they don't. No one that trust me, no one in the New York Times really knows what a checkoff is. Maybe one staffer, but like, they spend so much more money on like what's it vegan restaurant than actually covering this industry. So they're really easy to manipulate.
Yeah. One more reason not to get a New York Times subscription. We got a couple other questions. I want to get to these. This is a really fascinating analysis. It appears that large corporate interests are taking monopoly rents at each level of the food distribution network, some of which is actually provided for by federal law. As an antitrust litigator, where would you recommend developing a creative litigation to attack this system? Great question.
Yeah,
Only on a Capital Forum call can you ask a question like this.
I'm really convinced something with school milk. Given how regional school milks are, you just assume there's bid rigging going on in concentrated markets with large school districts.
Interesting. Interesting.
But like that's something like I don't know, take Chicago or Kansas City. If it used to be Chicago Tribune would kind of keep an eye on that, and those papers have essentially been gutted.
Well, something interesting to me, you mentioned that Kansas City, that seems like a good tip. Like, why is it in this metropolitan area more expensive for the same commodity that you should be cheaper because you
Or
have all the company,
or
operation there.
Chicago's next to Wisconsin. You know what I mean? Like this is it's not like it's Miami. You know what I mean? You kind of expect
You,
milk to be higher in
you,
Miami.
you know what's interesting? The DOJ's Chicago office does these agriculture investigations. Might want to look in your own backyard,
It's
DOJ.
a lot of it is those my from my conversations to have with people is a lot of those investigations start from a news story or an academic paper, and those pipelines have broken.
Interesting. Well, we got some feedback that one of our egg stories made its way to the Chicago investigators. Haven't done anything, haven't seen anything. Division's in somewhat of disarray, so I guess we
But
can't be too surprised.
to the litigators on the call though, too, I mean the JBS of it all, like how does someone plead guilty to bribery to acquire companies and allowed to keep their empire? Like that one I never got why state AG never went after. That should be unwound. You shouldn't be able to like engage in criminal activity and then pay a fine to get, and keep your business empire.
Do you think beef is the most interesting to watch? Let's say in November, Democrats win. You've got bigger, you've got majorities in the House, you could have a majority in the Senate, you've got bigger, you know, Democratic wins at the state level. Why do you think beef from a political standpoint is the most, it sounds like you think it's the most vulnerable, but
Yes.
I'm curious as to, from a political standpoint,
I, I'm a
why do you think that? Yeah.
I'm a big believer. There's a phrase in Italian called politics of the artichoke, where you pick your enemy off one at a time. Beef to me is the best one to pick off because it unites everyone. And I think don't underestimate America's in a beef moment. The largest sit-down restaurant now in America is not Olive Garden, it's not Applebee's, it's Texas Roadhouse. After a hard week of work, especially on a Friday night, if you want to understand what this country is, go to a Texas Roadhouse. Beef is what Americans view as, I mean, a treat. You also have Morgan Wallen being one of the big pop stars of this moment. You have Yellowstone being one of the biggest shows of this era. Like, I think in these reactionary moments, there's something. It's a marble. You know what I mean? It's a cowboy imagery of America. And I think for Democrats, especially viewed as such kind of a weak urban party, this is such a great way to like reclaim that or like challenge that. You might not win rural Iowa, but instead of getting 20%, if you can get 35%, you change that Senate race, that open Senate seat. Like that's where my anger got mad at Tom Vilsack was we know what to do here. We did it a century ago. We're not talking AI, we're talking hawks. And all they did during the Biden administration on meat was take $1 billion of taxpayer money and throw it at new startups. That is never deconcentrated in an industry. And I really do think the failure of Tom Vilsack contributed to Vice President Harris's loss. And also, like for certain swing seats, like the Montana race, the Nebraska Senate race, leaning hard to this issue to me is key. And like I would put Senator Booker in front of all these groups. Like with Klobuchar running for governor now, Senator Booker is next in line to chair the Senate Agriculture Committee. And I think that actually is going to be a game changer because he's one of the best on these issues.
Oh,
And if
interesting.
I would just pound the pavement on this bill, you know what I mean? Just talk meat, talk, especially JBS. I mean, it's funny when I present this book, I view presenting now as like stand-up comedy. I'm like reading the audience, seeing what hits, and like everyone knows meat is broken. You know what I mean? How many stories of child labor or like COVID worker abuse can
Yeah.
you hear?
Like people have read The Jungle, or
Yes.
at
And
least they
it's
know about it. Yeah.
and like here's like you can't even sell books on this subject anymore because people don't care. It's like that's why this issue I think is such a winning issue because it's also like it's not these communities now, these cattle guys, they're all Republican now. It's a really good way to outflank. I mean, they're being thrown underneath the bus. I mean, like one of my mentors in this space is Bill Bullard. I know he's been quoted a few times by you guys. He runs RCAF. He said this line, and I keep thinking about it on Fox a few weeks ago, where America's losing its beef sovereignty. He's not wrong. Like what happened to textiles in the 90s in America where it went offshore, that's what's happening to beef now in America. The American cattle herd is at the lowest level since the 1950s. And basically Trump is filling that demand with all this, Brazilian, Argentinian beef. And American cattle producers cannot compete up on price because it's a production model that has been alleged to use slavery and is done in the rainforest and really destructive practices. And so like, what a great winning issue. Because it's also like the image, imagine like Senator Booker in South Dakota with a bunch of like cattle hats around him. Like lean into that.
It does seem like there is a lot of opportunity, just given the despair, given the market failures, given that these are international monopolies dominating workers in the US, you would think it would be a good opportunity. We've got a bunch of questions. I've got to pick one of these.
Well, the last I
Uh,
want to say real quick is
yeah,
like
go
think
ahead.
of Iowa. Like Iowa's 25 million hogs, 70 that they shit three times more than us. That's estimated of 75 million people. Our pork consumption's flat. It's mostly for export, mainly for China. We're destroying Iowa to feed China. Like that is what's going on here. Like simple aggressive rhetoric here is really powerful.
All right. I'm gonna go with the most antitrusty question I've got. I've got a bunch of different questions. We'll send them to Austin after the call, just so that he can hopefully get back to our guests. But last question, extreme data collection is increasingly an antitrust issue in various industries. How does it affect seeds or ag more broadly? What's the competitive implication of the kinds of data Bayer and Corteva are able to collect from farmers about their crops, fields, and production? We were talking before the call about automation and machines, and obviously there's going to be a lot of data involved there. How do you think about data collection in ag markets and where the antitrust issues are?
I think this is the biggest black box in agriculture. And I go back to Chris Leonard wrote a book called Cokeland a few years ago. Koch brothers are the second largest private company in America. Cargill is the first largest. And both are in agriculture and they both are in the markets. And like the big thing here is what does this mean for informational advantages in these markets? Is there manipulation going on? Like we don't know. Um, you just know these tractors are going to be driverless soon in commodity production. They're taking up a ton of data. What's going? It's something I talk to a lot of people about, but no one knows. No one can really game this out. It's like the biggest unknown thing here because there's this obsession of data, and I think because these spaces are rural, and a lot of times people on the coast write them off as not that complicated. It's been understudied, but I really do want. I think this is like where the most any academics or journalists or anyone. This is to me is like where a lot of we just know there's a lot of dark things going on when the two largest private companies in America are in this space, but we know so little.
Austin, an incredible conversation. Your book is amazing. I'm super excited about your new book. When that comes out, let us know. We'll do a book event, have you through DC. I mean, I'm sure you're going to have plenty of invites for that, but thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah, thanks again for having me on. Thanks again,
And
everyone, for joining.
yeah, thanks everyone for joining. Got great interaction. Look forward to doing one again soon. Thanks again, Austin. And thanks everyone for joining us on the call today. This concludes the call.